All right, everyone, it is 1 o'clock, so we are going to get this rolling. We want to value people's time, and I know you all want to hear from Steve first. So we're just going to go through some housekeeping details. This is the tractor maintenance class with Steve VanValkenburg. Steve is going to, in the beginning of his presentation, kind of address how he wants questions asked. But we're all also recording this class as well, so please keep that in mind. So we are Snohomish Conservation District. Steve is on our board of supervisors. And if you have not worked with us before or aren't quite sure what a conservation district is, it's a special district. So think like fire district or diking district, draining district. So we offer technical assistance and financial assistance to landowners, and we cover Snohomish County and also Camino Island as well. So we're helping folks with natural resource conservation, and that is a whole suite of things from best management practice to soil health, doing rain gardens, working with habitat restoration, youth and adult education, and of course, agriculture resilience, urban ag, and really helping out with farmland preservation as well. So some of our upcoming events, we have a February 3rd, a trees discussion if you're interested in that. And then we are still having pre-orders for plant sale, where pickups will be the end of February, but those pre-orders will end on February 10th. And really just want to acknowledge some of the partners, Washington State University Extension, just really appreciate their support with this whole Country Living Expo and really beyond that as well. And also want to recognize Arlington Hardware. So thank you all for being here. And without further ado, I'm going to pass it on to Steve.
Well, good afternoon, folks. So we're going to do some tractor preventive maintenance discussions today. I present this annually at the Country Living Expo, and I also do it several other times a year for different organizations. For example, last summer I did a class on the same topic for the Organic Farm School on Whidbey Island. So this is not something that's new to me. What is new to me is presenting in this format, both on Zoom and with a PowerPoint presentation, because I really like in-person interaction. I was an agriculture teacher in high school for 30 years, so I understand about teaching and learning. And one of my passions, as Sarah had the opportunity to hear this afternoon, was education. And the other one is tractors and farming and agriculture. So Sarah's promised to keep me from going down any rabbit holes this afternoon, because I can take off like a shot if somebody asks a question, and away I go, and I'm difficult to stop sometimes. So because we're on a time limit of about 90 minutes here, I'll try to hold that to a minimum. I would like to ask you, here's how I want to do this. If you have questions, and I really encourage questions, because this is your class, this is not my class. You're the ones that came here to learn. Please ask questions, but I'd like to do it in this way because of our time constraints. Either in the chat box, jot down your question, and then I'll stop at periods of time during this discussion, and we'll see what's in the chat box, or use your reaction bar to raise your hand, and then Sarah can check on those when we get to that point. There you go. Sarah's got her hand up now, okay? All right. And then that'll stay up until the question is, until we take it down again, or you take it down. So without any further ado, I'm going to get this thing going into my screen and screen share. Okay, and I need to, let's see, I need to back up one little bit here and do a screen share. Okay. All right, do you see the tractors on your screen? Is that up?
Not yet, Steve.
Okay. Need to do something here then, just a second. Okay, it's not up yet, Sarah?
Not yet, no.
Why are we doing this? Just a second here. Oh, hope we don't lose a signal here. Okay. Cindy, I'm having some problems here. Dang it. Okay, so let me get this over to the side here.
I also have your presentation, Steve, if you want me to try to present for you.
Okay, share. Yep. And then I need to do slideshow.
Perfect. Your screen is up.
Okay, we're up and going now, right?
Yes.
Okay, you see my tractors there, right? That screen we're on?
Looks great.
Okay. All righty. So that's my herd, and there's about 250. Couple of these tractors are Oliver is born in 1957. So is Alice, and Ford was born in 1965. And I was born in the first half of the last century. So if you add this up, there's 250 years of experience here working on equipment and around tractors. So I spent a lot of time with grease on my hands just before I came in here to do this presentation. I was out working on a tractor in the shop. So I don't know everything, and I don't pretend to know everything, but I know a lot about this. So please ask questions as we go. So what we're going to talk about today is going to be tractor preventive maintenance. And it doesn't matter whether you've got one tractor or you've got big tractors, you've got a bunch of small, older tractors, little tractors, mid-size, it doesn't matter. The whole thing is we're going to be doing preventive maintenance. What that means is we're going to prevent problems from happening. We're going to do our daily maintenance on cleaning and care and conditioning of the tractor, greasing and oiling, those kinds of things in a timely manner so that you don't get into the situation we have to do this to a tractor. Now that will eventually happen, like all things but we don't want it to happen any sooner than it should. One of the things you need to do is get familiar with your tractor. And there's a couple of ways you can do that, of course. You can get familiar with your tractor dealership. They have some good people in there that are more than willing to help you talk through things. One of the basic pieces of information you should get is an operator's manual. Now, if you buy a new piece of equipment, that will often come with the equipment. If you don't have a new piece of equipment, or if you buy it secondhand or auction or something, you can obtain these pretty easily. If they're newer pieces of equipment, current production models, you can walk into your dealer. For example, my Ford loader tractor, when I got it, it was actually used. It was several years old, but I was able to walk into the Ford dealer and pick one of their owner's manuals right off the shelf. My Oliver, I just bought 2 years ago. I actually grew up on a tractor identical to that, so I wanted that badly. I bought it and brought it home. It led a rough childhood, so I had to go through and do a bunch of things. In fact, there's a couple of pictures of me working on it in here in this presentation today. But I was able to obtain an operator's manual for it, and I was able to get that online. And down at the bottom, I said online purchase, and this Gen Sales down here at the bottom, that's a really good place for getting manuals. Jen, and I've forgotten her last name now, is a young lady in the Midwest that actually as she related the story to me, she was working on an older tractor with her grandfather, restoring it on the farm, needed manuals, couldn't find one easily. Finally found one and then found out that other people needed them. So she put her buying up the production rights to these manuals of various kinds and then marketing them. And they're fairly inexpensive. I think I was like $30 shipping and mailing and everything. But the reason you want to have something like that is because if you're not really familiar with your piece of equipment, and even if you are, and I can tell you this manual is identical to the one that, like I said, we had one just like this when I was in school growing up. I spent undue hours reading. I literally took it to bed with me. So when I got this manual online, it was exactly the same thing. inside the owner's manual, you'll find things like this. Of course, all the nomenclature. Where are all the service points? And you would be surprised how many service points, grease fittings, oil check, oil fills, et cetera, adjustments and things there are on a modern piece of equipment. You will find, for example, basic adjustment instructions. This one is on how to adjust the clutch, and on how to adjust the power shift, how to adjust steering, the basic operating controls and what they all do. And some of these darn tractors today, and I drive tractor today for some of my former students, and these things are like getting in a jet airplane compared to the thing that I drove growing up. So how these instruments operate and what they mean and what they do. And then of course, all kinds of data, like if I'm changing oil, how much transmission fluid do I have to put in it and what kind, how much engine coolant do I have to put in and what kind, and so on. So there's all that valuable information in these manuals. There's also other kinds of manuals you may get if you are involved in working on your equipment. One of them is a tech manual or shop manual, and these are written in basic, easy to understand, step-by-step instructions. This is one that I got from my tractor when I started working on it. They also make it for equipment. Here's one I had off of Baylor. They may be large. For example, this tractor I'm working on in my shop right now, it's a 60-horse tractor that came off a dairy farm that was led a tough childhood, and I'm going through it, and I need that because I'm not familiar with that tractor, and it takes me step by step through what to do, how to repair this tractor and put it back on its feet again. There is also parts well, this is, for example, what the technical manuals would do for you. This was Oliver when I brought him home, and I had to tear him apart and do some work on the clutch and on the power takeoff. And this is what it looks like inside, because I was inside the transmission. It shows exactly what you do, the step-by-step instructions and things in this operation. So you have a successful experience with it, and it comes out working right. Also, they have parts manuals, and parts manuals, the value in them is they show exploded views. And this is an exploded view. That's part of that transmission I was just working on. That's this stuff right here. Okay, so it shows all that in an exploded view with the numbered pieces in sequence, and then on the page right adjacent to it, it shows what those parts are, their correct nomenclature. So when you go to the parts guy, and for Oliver, I have to call a guy in the Midwest to get parts, or you go to it's now Pape, which is John Deere, you go to Skolton's, which is Kubota, wherever you go for your equipment, you're on the same page as your parts guy. And that's really important because their lingo is different from maybe what you think that lingo is. Canuter valve to them is a Framus widget. So that really helps you, and it also gives you parts numbers and things with the nomenclature. And I just take a picture of mine and take it in with me often when I go to get parts, so we both know we're talking about the same thing. Okay, so those are three kinds of manuals, right? Owner operators manuals, which is kind of the basic thing you should have. And then if you're going to get into doing some major work on your equipment, the tech manuals and parts manuals. And again, all of these can be had. You can get them online. You can get Gen Sales, for example, is one. eBay, I found things on, and so on. So, all right, at this point, I want to take a quick stop. And Sarah, is there anybody with their hands up or with anything in the chat box, or anybody has a question we need to cover right now?
Yeah, someone does have a question. I'll read it out loud.
Okay, go ahead.
It says, my tractor right now is basically a deer riding mower. So anything you can cover on this would be great. I sure have a lot of this applies to my riding lawnmower. And David, if you wanted to ask your question out loud too, if I got it wrong or any clarifying.
No, that's perfect. Thank you.
Perfect.
Okay, so I'm going to start launching into the tractor stuff here real quick, and I will talk about, because your tractor probably is a gasoline, is that right? Okay, so yeah. Many of the small tractors today are diesel powered, but many of them, for example, both Alice and Oliver of mine are gas powered. So there's a little difference. Service typically is going to be the same. Okay. All right. Are we good with that?
Yes.
Okay, so just a little bit about tractors, and you know, tractors are really just like your car and your pickup. Only they're a lot tougher. And I don't know how many of you have tractors or cars, or pickups that are so what would that be, 63 or 64 years old? Alice and Oliver are both that age, and they're still running and still in good condition. They just make them really tough. But they're also easier to work on because you don't have to crawl under a hood. Now, having said that, I've gotten into this particular fairly new international I'm working on right now in the shop. I had to take the whole operator's platform off because of all the electronics and electrical controls and things built in them today too. So they can get kind of tough, and they are doing a lot of computerized stuff on tractors. Because computers make the work a lot easier for the farmer. You know, I know if you drive from, say, Everett to Spokane, that's about a 6-hour drive, and you get out and you're really tired. But a 6-hour drive from me in a tractor, when I'm doing field work, gets me almost to lunch, and then I've got another 6 or 8 or 10 hours after that. So operating equipment can be fairly fatiguing over long periods. So anything they do, and what they've done a lot in tractors is, you know, power steering, power brakes, power shift transmissions, on and on. Computer monitors of equipment. We even have auto steer in one of the tractors I operate quite a bit, which was a first for me. So they are getting more complex, but all in all, they're often easier to work on than their cars. So don't be afraid to attack one of these things. Tractors all have the same components. They have an engine that's fueled by gasoline, LP, or diesel. I'm going to talk about the differences in those a little bit. They all have transmissions. They may be gear type transmission, automatic or hydraulic driven, infinitely variable speed transmission. They have a differential on the rear end. They have electrical systems. They have tires. They're a whole lot bigger and more expensive than your pickup or your car. And they even have air conditioning and heating, of course, in the cabs because you're out there in all kinds of conditions. But the great thing about tractors that I love is that they are a lot easier. They're a lot larger than cars. They last a lot longer, and they're way more fun to drive. So let's talk about the differences in the fuel first. And this is where people may have some questions. So I'll stop after this little bit and we'll talk about them. So the two main types of fuels are diesel and gasoline / LP. Now, LP is liquefied petroleum, propane, you can call it. And you'll see a lot of these tractors, especially in the Midwest, you identify them by the large round tank on top of their hood. We don't see much of them in the Midwest here, or excuse me, in the West Coast here. In fact, pretty much they have gone out of service for agricultural equipment, except for things that have to operate indoors like forklifts and things, because their emissions are water vapor and carbon dioxide. They're not carbon monoxide like gasoline gets. Gasoline's the same gasoline that fuels your car or pickup. So you can get that fuel at the gasoline pump, and I'll show you some differences on the vehicle so you can tell the difference. The big power in tractors of all sizes today is going to be diesel. Originally, they're only reserved for the larger ones, but with the influx of small tractors in our country, under say 50 horsepower, diesel has gotten to be the big thing. And by the way, there are no American companies. I'm talking about John Deere, Ford, Case, International, all these different companies that make small tractors anymore in the U.S. They're all imported from typically from Japan or South Korea. India even builds some for us, and then painted and marketed, branded under the Case IH brand or New Holland brand, or John Deere, for example, uses Yanmar tractors. Good tractors, but they're because of the way the engine design systems are in those other countries. They were first to get small diesels on the market, and they've worked really well for us. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with what we're seeing today on the market with the small import diesels at all in farm equipment. Okay, so here's the differences in them. Okay, so first of all, let me see if I can get my little arrow down here and make it a little easier to see what I'm pointing at. Okay, that'll stay on the screen longer. So diesel engines, first of all, fire by what's called the heat of compression. That means the piston comes up rapidly to the top of the cylinder, and as it does, it superheats the air. And then just as the piston comes up to just before top dead center, the diesel fuel is sprayed in a very fine spray under very high pressure, and it ignites in that superheated air. Unlike, and I'll show you a gasoline engine in a couple of minutes, it's fired by a spark plug. So diesel's fired by heat of compression, which means you have to have a good, strong cranking system. You have to have good compression. The engine has to be in good shape, and your system of delivery, injection pump, injectors, et cetera, have to be in good shape. And it also depends somewhat how easily they fire on the ambient air temperature. In other words, if it's 20 degrees outside in February, it's going to start a lot harder than it's in 65 or 70 degrees in June, because it's taking in cold air and has to compress it and heat it from 20 degrees to the 400 degrees to fire the fuel, which is a lot harder than from the 65 degrees firing. So that's basically how a diesel engine works. Fires by heat of compression. It requires very clean fuel. So supplying clean fuel and filtration of fuel is really important in a diesel engine. And the components of a diesel engine, this happens to be on a Ford 5000 tractor, but this is the injection pump. This is the thing that creates those high pressures, times it, and gets it to the cylinders at the correct time, and does it through these steel lines. These pressures anywhere from about 1,500 to 4,000 pounds of pressure, so extremely high pressure. So it takes a good system to deliver that to these devices, which are on top of the head. They're called injectors. Now, if you have a diesel pickup, for example, you've got much the same kind of a system in your vehicle. Injection pump takes clean fuel, compresses it, gets it to the cylinder, to the injector at the right time, okay? Oops, I got to get out of this before I forgot that. Excuse me a second here. All right. There we go. Gasoline and LP engines, on the other hand, ignite with the air-filled charge with a spark. So what you're going to have is you're going to have on one side of the engine, you're going to have this carburetor, fuel comes in, clean air comes in, the two mix together in your carburetor. As the piston moves down, it sucks air and it picks up fuel in the carburetor. And so a mist of air and gasoline goes into the engine. When the piston comes up to top dead center at the right point, the coil here generates a high voltage, 7 to 15,000 volts. The distributor gets it to the right spark plug at the right time through these high tension wires and fires the spark plug across the gap at the end of the spark plug. That spark ignites the gasoline, and now you have the same kind of thing that's happening in your diesel engine. You have that air-fuel mix rapidly burning, expanding, pushing the piston down. So that's the difference between the two. Gasoline uses a carburetor and a spark. Carburetor to mix the air and fuel, and a high tension spark to ignite the air fuel, where the diesel uses a high pressure pump to spray through an injector a fine mist of diesel fuel into a superheated air. Okay, so I'm going to stop right there and say, does anybody have a question at this point about the difference between the two? Sarah, do you have anything?
Yeah, we don't have anything in the chat right now, Steve.
Okay, very good. So I'm going to move on. If you have other questions, I'll be glad to try to, because I know a lot of this is going to be new information, but we'll work through it. Okay. So diesel fuels. Diesel fuels, like I said, is the most common in small tractors and large tractors. All the fuel today is called ultra low sulfur highway fuel. It is less than 15 parts per million. 10 or 15 or 20 years ago, before a lot of the environmental regulations, I couldn't say that some of the diesel fuels as high as 500 parts per million. Today, it's all 15 parts per million or less. You can buy that right at the same pump. It's just going to have a green cover on the nozzle instead of the black covers that your regular gasoline does. Okay, and that'll be your diesel fuel. Same stuff you might put in your pickup if you got a diesel fired pickup. There is also another diesel fuel. It's a dyed fuel. It's red in color. I'll show you a picture of that here in a couple of minutes. And it's for off-highway, in other words, farm and construction equipment. And the reason they put a dye, or the reason it's red, is because it's not taxed. They're highway tax right now. Well, I think currently in this state, highway tax on diesel is about 58 cents a gallon. So it's going to be basically that much cheaper. Okay, and you can use that in your tractors. The only problem is you have to go to a bulk fuel plant to get it usually. There might be a few farm supply places that have fueling stations you can buy it from. You can use it in your tractor. Do not put that in your pickups. Not that it'll hurt your pickups, but if you get stopped by the State Patrol Weighmaster and they stick your tank, in other words, dip your tank, and they suspect you of using it, that's a pretty terrific fine because you're using untaxed fuel. And of course, the government needs to make sure they get your tax dollars. So, because that's what that goes to supposedly to support our highway structure. So you can use dyed or red fuel in your tractor. And if you can get it, if it's available to you through your bulk oil dealer, for example, here I'm in Arlington, so I go to Nelson Petroleum. If you're in Burlington, I think the Skagit Farmers, I think you can buy it there. It's just handier to go get the lowest sulfur, and you can mix the two together. That's no problem. So if you're out of diesel in your tractor on Sunday and the bulk plant isn't open, go ahead and get your low sulfur highway fuel from the clear fuel from the pump, from your Shell or wherever you buy your gasoline from. But there is dyed fuel that you can get. Okay, so, but the big thing, but no matter which one of these two is, a diesel must be kept very clean. Okay, now you can have diesel sitting around for 4 or 5 years, and as long as it's kept in a clean condition and it's not contaminated, no problem. It'll still burn because it doesn't have the real light volatile components like gasoline does. We'll talk about gasoline separate. That's a different matter. But the diesel fuel must be kept very clean and free of water and debris, okay, because of the very close tolerances in those diesel injection systems. To develop that 2,000 or 3,000 pounds of pressure that it takes to operate a diesel system, those injection parts in the pump and the injector are very finely machined. Their tolerances are less than 1,000th of an inch, and a hair is about 3,000ths of an inch across. So even a contaminant like that will jam up and destroy those systems. In a diesel system, the injection pump and the injectors are the heart of a diesel engine, and they're very expensive. A diesel pumps often run $800 or $900 or more in an engine. Injectors $100 a piece or more. So, and once they get contamination in them, they're done. It's you need to replace them or have them rebuilt. You keep your containers clean and free of water and debris. And I'll show you an example here, a bad example in a couple of minutes. And check for water in your system, and I'll show you how to do that. And change your filter on a regular basis. And where do you find out what a regular basis is? Go back to your owner's manual, and it'll tell you in there what the suggested interval is. Okay, so these are 2 samples of fuel. This is your clean fuel, your clear fuel that came out of a pump at the service station. This is your dyed fuel. Also notice this brown stuff in the bottom. That's a sample I took out of a fellow's tractor I was servicing, and he just put new fuel in it, and he complained that it got halfway. It was a large garden lawnmower type tractor. He said it got halfway across the yard and it quit and it won't start. And so I went over and I looked at his, I looked at his water bowl, his filter bowl, and I says, would you get me a clear container? And so he brought me this juice container, a clear glass one, and empty, of course, and I started draining it off into it. And this actually, believe it or not, was the 3rd container. And that's, what are those things? There are 16-ounce containers. That was the 3rd one before I started getting diesel into it. So this was just part of the amount. He is really lucky. Fortunately, he had a good filtration. It happened to be a Kubota tractor. He had a real good filtration system in it, so it stopped any of that water from going through the system. It simply just acted like it shut off the fuel, which is kind of what they're supposed to do. And all of that came, this is all condensation. I'll talk about that a little bit. And that was in his tanks his cans that he used to pick up the fuel. Also, I want to, one more thing, and that's the newer tractors all have to conform now to the current clean air emission standards to eliminate soot and nitrous oxides. They're called Tier 4, just like your on-the-road vehicles, whether you're big trucks or your pickups. And so there's some things they do a little bit different in them. First of all, they have to run on low sulfur fuel, which is all we can really get anymore. And they eliminate combustion byproducts in the engine by doing a number of things. One of them, the big things, is better engine design and injection design. So they burn the air fuel mix cleaner in the engine, so they emit less of this bad stuff, the soot and nitrous oxides. They also, some of them use DEF, or if you're familiar with DEF or DEF, it's also called blue juice. They have a number of names for it because it is blue in color. You have a separate tank on your vehicle that you add the diesel exhaust fluid for. It burns it at the rate of, I think it's about 1% of the fuel compared to DEF. It's actually liquid urea and water is what it is, that it burns it in the after part of the exhaust system to convert these noxious, these nitrous oxides into less harmful, into basically into water vapor and CO2. So it gets rid of that stuff. But if you have a Tier 4 engine, and you'll know that when you buy it from your dealer, they're fairly new. They will let you know that. And again, your owner's manual will tell you all this information. The other system they use is called a diesel particulate filter, or DPF, and they go through a regeneration. And I know both John Deere and Kubota use this particular system. And basically what it does is, when there's this electronic sensor in your exhaust system, that it senses the soot building up on a screen in your exhaust system. And when it does that, then it kicks the engine into a regeneration. So it puts extra fuel into the muffler, basically revs your engine up to a fairly high RPM and then burns that out. And you can continue using the tractor during that time, but it's just not going to run at idle. It's going to run at a high speed. And again, if you have one of these kinds of systems, check in your owner's manual, because it'll do some strange things you think are very strange, but it's actually doing what it's supposed to do to what the engine was designed to get rid of these kinds of things in their exhaust system. Okay. And again, like I say, check with your dealer and your owner's manual if it's what it is and why it's doing that. Okay, any questions at this point?
Ooh, we do have one question that just came into the
Okay.
chat, Steve. Is
Yeah.
there an optimum range, or is there an optimum temperature range in which to store fuel to prevent degradation?
Yeah, so could we just hold that for a minute? Because I'm going to talk about storage of fuel in just a couple of minutes. And if I don't answer that question, make sure they ask me that again. Okay?
Perfect. Thanks, Steve.
Okay. So gasoline. So gasoline is pretty volatile. In other words, it evaporates easily and quickly, which it's supposed to do because it has to vaporize quickly in the airstream and the carburetor. Because if it doesn't do that, the engine doesn't start. It's kind of, for example, like engines start harder in cold weather than they do in warm weather, and so we used to be able to use a choke. Today on our car engines, we don't even know what's happening because there's electronic sensors in the engine that sense the coolant temperature, engine temperature and stuff, and your injection system, whether it's a throttle body or whether it's each cylinder injection, puts extra fuel into the engine to make it start in cold temperatures. So we don't know it as much as when, for example, your lawnmower probably might have a choke that you can control on it for starting in cold weather. Okay. The big thing about gasoline, because it is so volatile, try to keep on hand what you're only going to use in a reasonable amount of time. That doesn't mean when you get to 90 days, like the milk in your fridge, you have to throw it out. That just means a reasonable amount of time. And if it gets to 100 days or 120 days, that's okay too. My tractors don't really care that much because they were built in a day when octane rating was not an important thing, as it is today. But what happens with gasoline is it starts evaporating or vaporizing out, and it leaves behind some more thick gummy deposits, and especially if it's inside of your engine, that's not good in the carburetor. But the fresher the fuel, the better off you are. If you're going to store it for a long time, use a fuel stabilizer for longer storage. And there is a product called Stable, and there's a couple of others that you can put in it too. And I put that in my engines that I'm going to leave over winter that I want to start, like my generator and portable welder and things like that. I'll put a little stabilizer in it and run it through it to keep it from oxidizing is the big thing. If you've ever smelled, for example, lamb that's been freezer burnt or bacon that's sat around too long, you'll know what oxidized stuff smells like. And fuel can be almost the same thing. In fact, you'll see often in the bottom of a carburetor or other piece of equipment that's had gas vaporized out of it, it almost smells like turpentine or looks like turpentine in the bottom because it's left behind the heavier, harsher products. So try to keep it a fresh supply on hand, right? So keep fuel stored in clean containers in a cool area. And so the question was, what's the optimum temperature? If I can keep my fuel around 50 to 60 degrees, colder than that doesn't really matter, but I don't like to get it warmer. I try to keep it out of direct sunlight, and I try to keep it in an area that is not subject to drastic changes of temperature. And the big reason for that is because of the fact that in the cool of the night, air expands and it will come into your fuel container. In the heat of the day, that hot air is driven out of the container, and it does that exchange all the time. So you're going to get some condensation inside your tank. And that is often what leads to that problem I showed you a few minutes ago with the water inside the fuel. And that happens in gasoline. And when I do the chainsaw demonstration tomorrow, I'll have a picture of the one that I took out of a chainsaw, same exact thing. Okay. And as I said, the octane rating is not an issue with older tractors, but there is a question people ask all the time about what about ethanol or non-ethanol gas? Ethanol is put into our gas in here in the Northwest at about 10% of the total volume. Ethanol is an oxidizer to help the fuel burn cleaner inside the engine. Ethanol also creates some problems in some engines. Most of our engines have gotten over that now. In other words, the manufacturers have developed gaskets and hoses and other kinds of things that are not as affected by ethanol, because ethanol is an alcohol, and alcohol is a very good solvent. And that tends to be the problem. It also tends to pick up water very easily and bring it into the engine. So that's one of the reasons that I don't like to use non-ethanol fuel in my small engines, particularly my truck and my pickups and things. I don't care because I'm burning that out, and I'm getting new fuel in it every couple of weeks or so. However, with some of my other stuff, that fuel may sit in there for 6 months during the winter time, and I don't want it to oxidize, and I don't want that alcohol to sit in the engine, in the carburation system for a long period of time. So I run non-ethanol gas. Now, so the next question, I guess, is where do you get non-ethanol gas? Well, again, I go to my bulk supplier. I think of Skagit, if you're in Skagit County, Skagit Farmers, fueling point there in Burlington, you can buy non-ethanol gas there. It's sometimes a little more expensive. Where I buy it, it's about 60 cents a gallon more expensive, but I don't care because I'm only burning 4 or 5 gallons in my lawnmower through the whole season. I'm not driving from here to Spokane in my pickup, which I'd burn probably 30 gallons. There's a big difference. In this, and that little bit of extra cost is well worth it to me to have the peace of mind that I know I don't have alcohol in my gas sitting there for a long period of time. If I'm using that mower every day, mowing or my rototiller, my garden every day, I don't care because I'm burning it out. It's not sitting in there for a long period of time. So that's the basic issue: is how long am I going to let it sit in the engine? and how much, and there is one other little issue, and that's the ethanol has a little bit less energy than gas, so you may notice a degradation in the total amount of power out of your engine with ethanol fuel compared to non-ethanol. But most of our equipment's so overpowered compared to what it's supposed to do, it doesn't really make that big a difference. So, okay. Here's your storage containers, whether they be the metal GI can or the plastic container, which is pretty ubiquitous today. Both of those, keep your fuel cans clean, and hardly anybody that I know that are in most of our situation, and I mean that by occasional users or small users, have bulk farm storage. The farm I work on, he buys 3,000 gallons at a time. It's in bulk storage, and he has his own filtration. For me and probably 90% of the rest of the people out there that use tractors and other small equipment, we take our 5-gallon can to the bulk plant or to the service station. We fill it up, bring it home, and pour that into our tractor. And that right there is where the problem comes with this kind of stuff, okay? Because you can get contamination inside of these, and it leads to enough of the building up that over time you get enough in there so it starts picking it up an engine. And that's where you really have to watch. So, and I'm not as worried about dirt and debris because I use a screen on my funnels that I dump it in and things with, but my transfer cans, I call it, where I'm transferring from the fueling point to my tractor. I never, if I, let me back up and try to reword this so it makes sense. I always make sure my can is completely empty before I refill it. Okay. If I look inside the can and there's anything in it, I dump it into a clean container. I've got a couple of old half-gallon glass jars around my shop that I'll dump what's left in that can into it. I'll look at it. I'll see what's in it because I can see in the bottom of it. I can see if there's debris, if there's water. If it is, it goes on my burn pile or into my waste oil storage. Okay. If it's clean, then it can go ahead and go into the equipment. And this includes also when I am filling. Let's say I use half of this to fill my tractor up or my rototiller or whatever. And then when I go to use the last little bit of it, because I'm not using it all at once, because for example, my rototiller, my tank is only about a half gallon. So when I get down to the end, I will then do a check. Okay. I'll never dump the last bit of it. If there's any question, if it's been sitting around for any period of time, right into my tank on my equipment, because I'm liable to put this kind of stuff into it, okay? And now I've got another set of problems to deal with. So the question that somebody asked about optimum temperature storage, like I said, I try to keep mine in the shade in my shed, so it's not subject to big fluctuations. If I take it out in the sun to fill my equipment, it goes right back in. I don't let it set out for a long period of time because it's going to sit there and get hot. It's going to push all the air out. And then that night, it's going to suck the cold air back in, which is going to be laden with moisture. And then the next time I take it out and it gets heated up, and eventually I'm going to get this problem. So that's a big thing. The biggest thing I can say with people in our situation where we're using only, 40, 50, maybe a couple hundred gallons a year, 90% of the time we're going to the fueling point with these kinds of cans and just keep them clean. So at the very last end of it, dump them out and dump them into some kind of check container and see what you've got there in your hand. Okay, so filters on these devices. So on gasoline engines, there'll often be this little visible bulb down here. And this is a bulb, there'll be a strainer at the top, and then you'll see it's called a sediment bulb. It's called that for a reason, because sediment from the tank, that water and any rust and any dirt and things will settle into the bottom of this, and the fuel is taken off the top. There's a shutoff right here. That fuel then runs through this line. It's going to go around the other side of the engine. It's going to come out over here and go into the carburetor. So I also put inline filters on all my stuff, my gas engines. I don't care whether it's my lawnmower or my rototiller or my tractors. These didn't come from the factory. I put them on. I just go to the auto parts store and I get that filter. It's got a 1/4-inch nipple on each end, cut the fuel line and put it inside. And that makes sure I'm only getting clean fuel delivered to my engine. And then occasionally I'll go, as I walk by, I'll look at it when I'm doing my checks. I'll look and see if there's any sediment in there. And you'll see that stuff in the bottom of that filter. It'll build up. Okay. I'll show you a diesel in a minute and you'll see some of the same kind of a thing on it. So change those filters on a regular basis. I do mine annually on my tractors. Okay, here's the diesel filters on a tractor, and you'll often see 2 or sometimes even 3 filters on these diesels because of the necessity to keep that fuel extremely clean. And right here in the bottom, right down here, is a little valve you can open to with a. But I put a clean cup underneath it, and I'll drain a little bit of that fuel off, and I'll check my fuel. The same thing as I'm doing with dumping that can into a clean container. See what I've got there. If I got clean fuel there, I'm good to go. If I got water there, then I got to start thinking about, can I get all that water off of that? Or do I have to start thinking about changing these filters? Okay, and these are, like I say, 2 filters on this. Some of them have 3, and sometimes those filters are quite large because of the necessity to clean that fuel. This is called the primary filter. The first fuel comes into it, then the clean fuel goes into the secondary filter, and then from the secondary, it's going to run over to the injection pump, and it'll often, and so you're getting clean fuel, and it'll come in right here. There's also on the injection pump, because it's also important you keep air out of the system on a diesel, because if you get air in the system, this injection pump cannot compress that air. Liquid acts like a solid under pressure. Okay, it's a basic rule of physics, and for these injector pumps and injectors to work, the fuel, you have to have only fuel. It has to act like a solid. So when it puts out 3,000 psi here and a 1/4 ounce of fuel up at the injector, that 3,000 psi and a 1/4 ounce of fuel arrives up there. Otherwise, it's like kind of like squeezing a balloon, right? If there's air in it, nothing happens. It doesn't get the pounds of pressure up to the injector. The injectors don't open, and the tractor doesn't run. Okay, so. And in changing your filters, okay, either you run out of fuel or you take the fuel filter off to put a new one on, you're gonna get air in your system. So it's important you bleed the system, get all the air out of it before you try to start the tractor again. So one of the first, and there's a number of different ways this is done depending upon the system. Kubota is different than John Deere, different than Ford, et cetera, et cetera. But the key thing is you got to get the air out of the system. How do you know which way to do it? Check your owner's manual, okay? Get your owner's manual to go through all the step-by-step process of bleeding the system. All right, so on this system, what I would do is, because this is a gravity feed tank, I would shut off, there's a little shut off down at the bottom. I'd shut the fuel off. I would take my filters off, put new filters on, and then I would go over and I would open this little nut right here at the top and this little nut right here. Those are bleeder check valves on this. And I'd open my valve at the bottom of the tank, and I come over to the injector pump, and on the side of it is a little hand primer pump. Now, some of them look like a little tire pump. Some of them look like this, a variety of different shapes. But I would then pump this, and that would bring fuel from the fuel tank and put it up into the primary filter. And I would watch that. I would continue pumping that by hand, moving it up until it'll see bubbles, and then finally you'll see a little bit of fuel flow at the top, and I'll tighten this nut. And then I will watch this one as I continue to pump, and I will then tighten that nut when just fuel flows out. So you want to have a rag in your hand to just dab that little bit of extra fuel that comes off the top. So now you've got fuel back in this system, okay? The next thing you're going to want to do is you're going to go to the top of the engine, and you're up to the injectors, and you're going to crack, in other words, open about a half turn with a wrench, these 2 lines, okay? So that when you start cranking the engine, all right, like you're trying to start it, you will watch this or have somebody help you if it's a long distance away, and you'll start throwing a little bit of air out, okay? And then some bubbles, and then it'll start to try to fire. And as it starts to fire, then you close each of these nuts. Now, you may not even have to go that far. There may be enough fuel in your system that you can start it right from bleeding the filters and then go with it here. Just depends on your tractor and your system. But just be aware that if you run the diesel engine out of fuel, or you change the fuel filters and introduce air into the system, you are going to have to do some bleeding of the system. Okay? Any questions about this? I'm at the end of fuels. I'm going to change to oils and lubrications. Anybody have any questions now?
Yeah, we have one question, Steve.
Okay, go ahead.
Is it okay to pour the good fuel off over off of the water and use it in equipment after separation in clear container? And how often do you change fuel filters?
Okay, so let's answer the last part first. I change fuel filters on a regularly scheduled basis, and that regularly scheduled basis is listed in your owner's manual. Some of them are 100 hours, some are 300 hours. It depends upon the system, how good their filtration is, the manufacturer's recommendations, follow them. Equipment that I don't get to that 100 hours on, for example, my let's see, my wood splitter, portable welder, rototiller. I probably don't get more than 50 hours a year on those. I will do it on an annual basis. For example, a rainy day in the fall, my wife has a rule that the generator has to be running and ready to go before I can go hunting in November. So that's my scheduled date for service for the generator in case we have a power outage. But yeah, there'll be and I'm going to talk a little bit more about this under filters here about the scheduled maintenance. But look in your owner's manual, or talk to your petroleum dealer, talk to your service tech at the service managers, your tractor dealer. They can tell you how often it is to. And some of them have to actually even say in a sticker someplace, service every 50 hours or 100 hours or something like that. And in the first part of that question was, is it safe to titrate off that good fuel on top? Boy, if you're really careful, but I try to keep that to a minimum because there's an interface down in here. I don't know what's contaminated here and what's not. If I had 5 gallons like this, I would try to pour it off, and I'd be pouring it into a jug of some kind to make sure I'm getting clean fuel. Once you tip this up far enough, that water is going to kind of want to try to sneak up out of that spout. So if I've got this amount, now that goes in my used oil barrel. And I try to, my test containers are actually their old peanut butter jars, so they're about 1.5 quarts or something like that. So it'll hold quite a bit. And that amount, I would rather get rid of it than I would take a chance on getting contamination in my engine. Okay, did that answer the question? Okay. So let's talk about oils now, the lubrication. So here's what oils do in your engine. They lubricate the moving parts, which is why they're called lubricants. So all the sliding and rotating parts in your engine are supposed to have a bath of oil around them to lubricate them and keep them from metal on metal wear. They also cool the engine by carrying the heat from the top of the combustion chamber from the pistons down into the oil sump, which is why your bigger engines have bigger oil sumps. It's not because they use more oil, it's because they generate more heat, and it takes a lot of heat. It takes a lot of oil sump to get rid of that heat. They also actually, in fact, I think I've got a picture here someplace later on of an oil cooler. Your automatic transmissions, your cars all have oil coolers, and that's to cool the oil because oil gets heated up by this process of being passed through all these moving parts, pumped around an engine, being near the heat of combustion and so on. So it cools the engine. That's an important thing that oils do. It also cleans the engine by taking combustion deposits from the combustion chamber and moving them into the bottom end of the engine, into the oil sump, and holding them for disposal. And that's really the reason you change oils, because oils get dirty. They don't really wear out unless you've overheated the oil. They really get dirty. And that's the reason we change oils and we change filters, okay? And then, of course, they seal the engine combustion chamber. Oil is sprayed on the cylinder walls. The piston rings move as the piston moves up and down, spread a thin film of oil on the cylinder walls, and that's what helps seals the combustion in the top part of the engine. So it does all those things. And from between a gasoline engine and diesel engine, there's different requirements. Of course, the diesel engines have much higher compression. They have different products of combustion, and they operate at different temperatures, and of course may even operate under higher pressure. So there's different requirements for the types of oil that in the two types of engines, and I'm going to talk a little bit about those. So 2 things about oils that you probably, you may have heard the terms before, but I'm going to explain what they mean and why they're important. The first one is oil viscosity, and the second one is grade of oil. And the grade is really more important for what we're going to talk about. But viscosity basically is the thickness of the oil. The higher the number, the thicker the oil. Okay? Now, why is oil thicker, or why is oil tends to stay in place on the engine and the moving parts better, okay? Thinner oil flows in the engine better in cold temperatures, and both are important. And I'll tell you right now, the greatest wear time in an engine is the first 30 seconds you start that engine up, because it's cold. It doesn't have a lot of lubrication spread throughout the engine. That is when most of the wear occurs in your engine, is the first 30 seconds of starting it. So it's not a good idea to start your engine up and go right to full load. One of my grandfathers was a dairy farmer. The other one was a automotive machinist, and the automotive machinist, I can remember getting in a car with him as a little kid, and he would start the car and he would sit there for, like, we thought it was hours, but it was probably only a couple of minutes, because he wanted to make sure that engine was warmed up, because he saw the results of it not being warmed up and being put under full load. Saw that as things that he had to machine in the shop. So in cold weathers, we'll use a lighter grade, or excuse me, a lighter viscosity. In warmer temperatures, we use a heavier viscosity so that oil stays in place. And typically oils run, for most of our automotive use, from about a 5 weight up to about a 50 weight, okay? Now, you also see multi-viscosity oils, like this is the one from my one of my pickups, a 5W30. The 5 means it acts as a 5 weight oil, very thin oil in the wintertime, so it gets in there and lubricates quickly, and a 30 weight in colder temperatures. And that's because we don't just operate our cars or even our tractors in just hot weather or just cold weather. Now, a snowblower, yeah, we probably only operate it when it's 30 degrees or lower. So you could go with just a straight single viscosity oil. Like this is what we call a single viscosity. It's just 30 weight. Or we don't operate it just in something just using a 50, that would need just a 50 weight. So we have multi-viscosities for many of our vehicles. And if you have a gasoline engine or a small engine, that is fine. You can use a multi-viscosity oil. I use a single viscosity oil because most of my equipment operates in average temperatures. We're blessed in the Puget Sound area here to have a fairly moderate climate. We very seldom get down to 0, and we very seldom get up above 100 degrees. So most of the time, we're in those moderate temperatures, and a single viscosity oil works just fine. Now, I run single viscosity oil in my gasoline engines for this simple reason. 1, it's cheaper, okay? And 2, when you start getting a wide range, like here's a fairly wide range multi-viscosity oil, 15 to 40. They make it that wide of a range by putting all kinds of additives into the oil, which makes it more expensive, but it also makes it more subject to degradation. In other words, when you start talking about engine getting warm and burning or using the products out of an oil, this is what it is. It's the additives that do all the things that we talked about back here. Okay, so those additives that do a lot of these kinds, the basic oil lubricates, but the rest of it is these additives. So that's viscosity. Your owner's manual will tell you which one to use. Typically, you can get about a 30 weight or like a 5W30, same thing as you use in your automobiles, okay? The other one is grade, and grade, let me back up just one second and explain another term. So you see it says SAE in front of these. That means Society of Automotive Engineers. That's the governing body that determines viscosity or thickness of the oil, okay? The other one is engine oil service grade, and it's by the American Petroleum Institute, or API, and it's really important for those of you that have gasoline engines and diesel engines around, because on the back, I'm going to switch just ahead 1 minute, on the back of your can, on the front of your can will give viscosity, on the back of the cans, it has this little circle, and it'll have in it the API service, and this was an SJ. I couldn't find a good one for a combination of diesels, but I'll explain that in just a minute. So let me back up here to this one. Okay, so there's 2 grades. S for service, okay? For gas, think spark. That's the way I remember it, and the way I always taught my students to. If it says S, that's for spark ignition, okay? So what has spark ignition? Gasoline engines. And C was the commercial grade for diesel engines because they fire by heat of compression. So again, that's kind of how I always taught the kids to remember. S grade for spark, C grade for compression or diesel engines, okay? And also we'll give the additive levels for the oil performance within the engine. When they first started coming out with API grades, they had very low requirements in the engines. They weren't very sophisticated engines, and we're talking about back in, say, the 1930s. And so they used SA as the designation. We're clear up to SJ, now in our modern engines, okay, for gasoline, and CG or CH, I think, for diesel engines. So you want to use the engine oil that's going to work in that engine, and any of the new oils are going to work in older engines, okay? The danger comes in if you go to a garage sale or the back of your grandma's garage and find a can from 1940 and put that in your new engine. It's not going to have the additives it needs to make that oil operate correctly, okay? Typically, we don't see a big problem with the additive levels, more people using the wrong service or commercial grade, okay? The wrong grade of oil in the engines. And be sure, especially if you've got diesel engines, that you use the C grade. Now, many oils are multi-grade, okay? Which means they have, excuse me, they have on the back, it'll say SJ/CD, for example. That's okay for a diesel engine, okay? That's okay for a gas engine. You can put it in both. This particular thing is called Delo 400. It happens to be a multi-grade oil. It says right on the front it's a multi-grade oil, so it operates on gas engines and diesel engines. Okay, I run this in my diesel equipment, the diesel engines that I have. I run this in my gas equipment. I could put this in my gas equipment, but it's more expensive, so I choose to run this lesser expensive, good grade single viscosity oil. I would not want to put this oil in a diesel engine because it doesn't have the correct grade, the correct additives to operate my diesel engine. So have I thoroughly confused you on this? Okay. Anybody have any questions at this point? Because we're going to move on to actually doing how you change engine oils.
I don't see anything in the chat right now, Steve.
So just remember to look on the back of the can. Looking at the front of the can is important for the viscosity. Look on the back of the can. It's more important to find the grade. And I'll tell you, if you go into a service station, for example, and you need an extra quart of oil, or you go into a hardware store or into an automotive parts store and need a quart of oil for your car, you will find it. You will not always find the either multi-grade or a diesel engine grade. Okay, so be aware. Now I work in Arlington Hardware part-time in the saw shop, and I know inside in our lubricants we do not have oil based for diesels. Okay, we do not have that. Ours are all for spark ignitions or gasoline engines. You need to go either to your oil supplier, your tractor dealer, or to an automotive store and make sure you're getting the grade for diesel engines. Okay, all right.
Quick question, Steve.
Yes.
What's the J level again?
Oh, okay. So like SH or CD on the slide I'm on. Okay, so this is spark ignition or gasoline ignition service grade. This is the level of additives that's in it, and that we're about SJ now. I think that might be one that's a couple years old. And every 4 or 5 years or thereabouts, the grade, as more requirements are put on the engine for emission standards and type of materials they use in the engine, compression ratios, whether you're using ethanol or non-ethanol fuel, all these kinds of things build into this, and that's what this thing right here signifies, okay? So if you're buying new oil, you don't have to worry about it, okay? If you're buying new oil, because all of them they don't stock old oil, old grades. You only are going to get the newest, most current thing on the market. And the reason I mention that is because I know a lot of people go like to a garage sale and they may find some old oil on a farm someplace. Check and see what your grade is supposed to be, okay? And don't put something that doesn't have the additives in it needed to lubricate your engine correctly. So did that answer the question?
I was double checking just to make sure, but I haven't.
You answered it.
So possibly. Sorry, what was that?
He answered it.
Okay, thanks, Barney.
Yeah, just make sure I get, like I say, off on a tangent sometime, and I'll. All right, so servicing the engine. Now, how do you know when to service in the engine? Again, look in your owner's manual, it'll give you service intervals. Just looking at the color of the oil doesn't always tell you anything, because diesel oils, for example, because of the sulfur in the fuel and the kinds of things they do, they turn black within the first couple hours. So just having black oil doesn't mean anything. What is important in the engine is you check it on a regular basis, and that means every 8 to 12 hours of operation, okay? or each time the engine is operated, check the oil level. Okay, and you got a dipstick, just like in your car on the side of the engine, someplace easier to get to. You don't have to crawl up in it. My 2014 pickup, I got to crawl up under the hood and up on top and get in and way back in to get at it. So it's really easy on the tractor. And Oliver, I just walk up beside him, same thing with my other tractors, okay? And then add the correct oil to the proper level, okay, as needed. And it'll say full or add or whatever. Don't overfill the engine. Overfilling it just blows that extra oil back out, but just, bring it up so it's a proper operating. And it's a good idea to always use the same kind of oil. Any oil is better than no oil, but try to keep enough on hand that you have an extra quart or something around so of the same kind of oil you're using in the engine. It's going to match it in viscosity, going to match it in grade. Everything's going to be a lot happier in the engine, okay? The dipsticks and the oil fill, let me just explain that. Oil fill, I think it's obvious, dipstick and oil fill hole, same hole, right? That's not always true on every piece of equipment. There it is on the Ford 5000. And here is the under the hood, clear up on top. There's the oil fill, okay? So, and how do you know where the hole is? And it's the right hole to fill, look in your owner's manual, okay? It'll say it there. All that stuff is right there under the service stuff. Okay, methods of changing the oil. Here's what you need to do. You need to change your oil on a regular basis, either hours of operation. Tractors don't operate by miles, they operate by hours of operation, or once per year. Okay, and once per year typically is more because of condensation when that tractor is setting. In fact, a lot of cold starts and a lot of occasional use is harder, particularly on a diesel engine, than if I'm running the tractors for Andrew and I'm working at 15 hours a day, day after day after day. That is not as much wear on it on that same engine as if I was to start it up for a half hour, run it and shut it down, start it 2 days later for a half hour, et cetera. So, yeah, if you're doing it, especially on occasional operation, do it on an annual basis or something that it reminds you to do it. Say, drain your oil when the engine's oil is warm. That because the oil is warm and it picks up all that debris. Remember, we changed oil because the oil gets dirty. It's picking up all that debris in the oil sump, and it's going to drain it out. Just remember that oil, it doesn't have to be hot, but it's just warm. Warm it up for a half hour or so is all it's going to take. Use the correct grade and viscosity of oil for your engine and the climate. Okay, we've talked about all that. Your owner's manual will give you all the correct oil and service intervals, and also change filters at the same time. Okay, because that oil is filtered, and there's a number of different shapes of filters. This is a cartridge type filter, which is used on some equipment and some types of oils. And this is a spin-on type, which is used on your cars and on many tractors today. And these are a couple of filter wrenches that I use for taking these off. This has its own cover over the top. You take it off, drain it out. This one is a spin-on. It just is the same thing. Like it says, it's got threads in the far end down here that spin on and off. Just kind of watch when you're doing this. There is a gasket in there. Make sure the gasket stays in place. Some things that I keep around all the time for doing my oil changes. I wear gloves because it keeps that oil, particularly if that oil is warm, off my hands. I don't have to wash my hands as much. And particularly when I need to handle other things. A pan to drain into, and be aware that some of these tractors contain 4 or 5 gallons of engine oil. And the bigger tractors have an appropriate size container. I always have some absorbent materials. This is floor sweep or floor dry around to clean up my mess. And this is an oil absorbent cloth, which is really handy because I lay it underneath my pan when I'm draining. So any little drips are caught there. You can buy this at any fueling depot, auto supply store, or many hardware stores. This particular one is called New Pig. I don't remember what PIG stands for. It's polyintegrated something, but it's basically a material that's manufactured and it's super absorbent. It really works good. You can have spill oil on the ground, put a layer of that on top of it, and come back, and all you see is a little bitty stain. And then you dispose of this properly because now it's got oil, so it's a hazardous material. And of course, towels, and then I have a container that I have labeled for used oil, and that used oil then I can dispose of properly. Either I have a friend that has an automotive repair shop, and he has a recycle bin there that we take it and put it in. Our county waste transfer station has a place we can dump that in. However, but just make sure it's disposed of properly, okay? And then you want to mark your filter to identify it. And there's a number of ways you can do that. Felt pen, a paint pencil. You can get some of these stickers from your bulk oil plant. You may have in your owner's manual on the back of it. One place I used to work, we had a notebook that each piece of equipment was listed and the hours and date and who serviced it and what we serviced. So some record, and this is really easy, just on the side of your filter, you know, right there, you walk by and look at it. Oh, I did that last December 1st. And at this many hours, 1835 hours. And I know if I'm at 1935 hours, it's time to change. If it's a 100-hour interval, first December 1st to 2021, et cetera, whatever. So it makes it really simple to keep track of these kinds of things that you're servicing. Oh, I do the same thing, by the way, on my vehicles. When I change oil, I do the same thing, except it's underneath so you can't really see it instead of out in the open where you're at all the time. And there are other types of oils for the tractor. I've got one tractor that uses 5 different oils, from an engine oil to a hydraulic oil to a tractor transmission fluid to a power steering fluid to a AW46 turbine oil for the loader part. So you need to know which oil goes where. And your owner's manual will tell us. A lot of the tractors today use just 2 oils, one engine oil and one for the transmission, rear end, hydraulics, i.e. everything else. So just kind of get familiar with in your book which oils, and again, your owner's manual will tell you this. And if you got a newer tractor, a new tractor, your dealer should be able to tell you this stuff too. Okay. All right. And then here's some examples. These are a couple different tractors, but just at different places. Here's a diesel fuel filter. There's the water port for titrating off, and you water the bottom. This is the transmission and hydraulic filter. Here's on a different tractor. There's a spin-on oil filter. That was on that 4 to 5,000. There's the dipstick we were looking at a minute ago. One is this one. This is the check and fill hole for the transmission and hydraulics. Here's Oliver. There's the hole for, that's transmission. That's 90-way gear lube. Here's the Ford. That's tractor hydraulic fluid. So they're all over the tractor, know where they're at so they don't get missed in service. Okay. All right. Air filters. This is one that really people neglect a lot. They don't think about this all the time, but air filters really, a plugged air filter or missing air filter can do more damage to your engine than anything else in your engine. I had experience a number of years ago to work on a diesel engine that at 40 hours, that was actually 3 operating days in the field. The engine was completely shot because it came from the dealer with, let me go back here, and I'm going to jump back and show you where I'm talking about this. This line right here from the air cleaner to, in that case, it was the intake. Okay, this is a gas engine, that's Alice, but this somehow had a hole in the back side of it. Okay, it came from the dealer that way, and that let dirty air in. If you've ever been in a hay field, you know they can be, or in a tillage field. This happened to be in a hay field. They can be extremely dirty, and that air is sucked in, and it was just like throwing handfuls of dirt into the engine. Okay, and in 40 hours, it totally ruined about an $8,000 engine. So change your air filter. They really are the most neglected, but they actually get dirty fastest. I'll show you a couple here in a minute. Dirty air entering an engine can destroy an engine in a short time. I explained that. Service your air filters daily under dusty conditions. When we're in the hay field or out in the tillage field, if it's dusty, those filters get serviced every day because that's what can damage the engine. And air filters are very easy to clean. You don't normally have a bunch of oil and grease and other things you have to work with. There's a couple different types of air filters, dry element air filters and oil bath type, and I'll show you examples of both of them. And often many pieces of equipment have a pre-cleaner mounted on them to get the big stuff out first. Okay, so here is a dry element air filter. This happens to be a 2-stage filter. Here's the big filter on the outside. This particular tractor, the hood lifted up just like it would on your car. You're right there. This cover comes off easily with 3 little snaps. You grab the filter, pull it out, and just tap the dirt. I'm just banging it against the front tire. And this actually had quite a bit of dirt in it. And then what you do is blow the dirt out. Now the air comes through around the outside, is filtered out, goes to the inside into the 2nd stage filter there they are standing next to each other. So when you blow the dirt out, you want to blow it from the inside out, blow that dirt back out. And this is just my blow gun with a little piece of copper tube extension on the end of it to blow the dirt back out. And then they're usually good to go again. We replace them about once a year, depending on how dirty they've been or if we can't clean them. If they got wet, we can't clean them then. The water holds the moisture, the dirt in, so we'll replace them also then. But typically, they'll go a year. And again, we write on the ends of them. Usually, my hand is over it. You can't see it. There's a date on the end here, or a number of hours on this one. So tapping them out gets most of the dirt out, then blowing them out with compressed air. Same thing with this secondary filter. They usually don't, hopefully they're not dirty. If they're showing a lot of dirt, that means there's something wrong with the primary filter. So we'll clean them up, put them back together, and it's like a 5-minute service. Doesn't take long at all to protect your engine. This is called an oil bath. You don't see this a lot on newer rigs. It used to be really prevalent on a lot of rigs. This is Alice. This is the pre-cleaner. We're going to look at it in a minute. Dirty air comes in from the outside. The big chunks get left behind. Air travels down through a pipe, goes down to the oil bath cup here in the bottom, picks up a little bit of oil, goes back up, and that oil then mixes with the dirt, the granules, and is filtered out and drips down into the bottom of the cup. So to service this, you take off this cup. There's usually an easily no wrench kind of thing, just a little screw deal here, a thumb screw. Loosen this clamp, dump out the filter into your recycle container, and then look at the stuff that was in the bottom of that. Okay, you wipe, that's all the stuff, the dirt that was in the air that would have gone into your engine. Clean it out good, a rag, and I'll use solvent sometime or brake cleaner. Fill it back up with the engine oil, the same engine oil you put in your engine. Remember that yellow can. And then fill it up to that level and reinstall it, and you're done. That's about maybe a 10-minute procedure, okay? All right, the pre-cleaner at the top usually, again, comes off real easy. A little screw at the top comes off, take it out. There's the dirt that it was collecting, the big stuff that would have gone down in and got into that oil bath below. Again, really easy to clean. And this is present on, excuse me, brand new stuff too, especially bigger equipment that's in the field. On our combines and things, we have pre-cleaners to get the big stuff off because there's so much dirt present in that kind of environment. You need to protect the engine as much as you can. Okay, greasing, that's the other thing. And I can remember my grandfather that was the dairy farmer saying grease is a lot less expensive than iron. And he was right about that. So don't have to put an excessive amount of grease in it, but keep the joints greased. And the grease in this case is to prevent wear between metal parts, metal on metal, and usually on slow moving parts like your steering system, axles, etc. Okay, and they should be greased every 8 to 12 hours of operation. In fact, if anybody has a loader tractor, you'll find grease points all over that at all the pivot points. And there's a number of different kinds of grease guns. Here's an electric-driven grease gun, which are nice but expensive. There's a pneumatic one I use around the shop because I've got compressed air. Here's my hand guns I use out in the field. They even make a small gun like this for small operations. And they take all of these take a cartridge. This one, of course, takes a much smaller cartridge. But and just a good chassis lube, same as you put in your car, is all it's really required. Just keep grease in it. I also have a couple other things that I use with it, and I would recommend maybe you have, and these are replacement grease zerks. If you've got a tractor that was made offshore, they're probably metric, and I don't care whether it came from Europe or the Orient. They're going to be metric fittings, and if you have a larger tractor or one that was built here in the U.S., they're going to be imperial thread or inch thread, both bolt thread. That's a 1/4 28, like a 1/4 28 fine, and those are pipe threads, 1/8 inch pipe and 1/4 inch pipe. You'll find a mix of those throughout the implement. And these are a couple little devices that I use to get in places that are real hard to get at. Although most tractor fittings are easy to get into, but you can get this at any auto parts store, any tractor dealer, wherever. Just if you've got a fitting that won't take grease, replace it because there's wear going on beneath that point. If you got a fitting that's broken off, and that happens a lot in farm equipment, replace it and get grease into that point. The engineers didn't design that point and take the time to machine that thread in place and install a grease fitting just because they wanted to. They did that to decrease the wear on your equipment. So let's take advantage of that. Okay. Greasing your equipment. Here's a typical grease fitting on the steering arm. This happens to be Oliver. The first and last thing you do is always wipe the grease fitting off. There'll be dirt and things around this grease fitting, and the dirt can accumulate on the top. And if you put a grease gun on that, you're going to drive that dirt. Apply your grease until you see the grease start to come out. You'll hear it kind of like a crackling sound as it starts to push its way through. Sometimes you'll even see it push a little water out. Well, that is good, because you know then it's getting in there, it's pushing stuff out that wasn't supposed to be in there. And then when you get all done, wipe those zerks off again when you get done, because that extra grease, all it's going to do is get on you, and it's going to attract more dirt. Okay, so all right, I want to stop again at this point, Sarah, and see if there's any questions, because we're going to move on to engine coolant next. Anybody have any questions?
Nothing in the chat right now, Steve.
Very good. I've either put them to sleep or I've said everything that needs to be said, right?
I think you're covering things pretty well.
Okay, see how we doing for time. Let's see, 2:19. Where I gotta get going here, okay? Because we got to be done by 3, right?
I believe 2:30.
2:30. Okay. Well, we're getting close to the end here. Okay. So engine coolant or antifreeze that protects the engine coolant from freezing, which is not a good idea in engines, because water, as you know, when it freezes, it expands, it tends to push out on things and bend and break parts of the engine, which again is not good. Keep a 50-50 mix of antifreeze and water to top off the radiator, because that's the optimum coolant level. Most of the time, if you just keep adding water, you're continuously diluting your coolant and raising the freezing level. So raising the point that it'll freeze at. So I always just keep a 50-50 mix. And you can see I wrote on top of this, I'll take a can, I'll dump half of it into another container and then fill the rest with water, and then write on it mix, so I know it's mixed and it's ready to go. You can also buy it pre-diluted, it'll say on it, or you can buy it in a concentrate. Either way, you get it. Just make sure you check your engine coolant and you keep adding a 50-50 mix. Also test your mix. I usually do that again in the fall to make sure the freezing point. I'll show you a tester here. And then drain and clean your system regularly, like every couple of years anyway, should drain and flush it and test it. Antifreeze hydrometers, they work like this. This one has 2 arrows on it. This arrow has to be vertical, so it's giving a true reading here, and you put it in the top of your radiator, squeeze the bulb on top, and it suck it up a bunch of antifreeze over the top of the arrow, and it'll come up, and this says about -10 degrees Fahrenheit. Okay, so I'm good to go. And this one, it's the number of balls that float. The more the balls float, the lower the temperature is protected to. And then I'll usually take my felt pen or my paint stick, and I'll write on top of the radiator in here underneath where I can see it, what it was protected to. Also, at the same time you're doing that, check your other parts of your cooling system. Check your hoses, radiator hoses, for being soft or bulges or cracks. Check your fan belt to make sure it's not going to break on you and it's in proper tension. Okay, and then also, while you're doing this, blow off your radiators, blow them out, because they suck dirt in and chaff and all kinds of stuff that's going to plug them up and not allow air to flow through. That's the air cleaner we were looking at a few minutes ago, just from the other side of it. There's your radiator coolant fins. Here's your oil cooler that's in front of it, so it has to be cleaned too. So if you blow from the back side to blow all that stuff out. Also, on a lot of tractors and trucks and things that work, particularly in the hay fields, I would hang a screen. You can't see it in here, but it's like actually a door screen that I would hang inside of the grill just over the radiator, and that would keep the chaff and things and from getting inside of those fins and plugging them up. Also, if you get an oil leak, particularly oil coolers or things, dirt tends to collect on that and then plug those fins also. So kind of make sure you solve those problems before it develops into a big cooling problem and overheated engine. Overheating the engine will destroy the engine and almost as fast as dust getting in the engine. Okay, let's talk about batteries, because that's another service point. And on this particular one, the battery was right here in front. Keep them charged up, keep the electrolyte levels full, remove corrosion from the terminals, keep them clean, because corrosion robs the juice going through them, and it's self-propagating. If it starts corroding, it just continues and gets worse. And corrosion creates resistance actually between the battery terminals and the wires, and that means electricity doesn't get through, but it generates heat. And that heat then increases the rate of, keep your battery cables in good condition. I don't know how many rigs I've worked on that the complaint has been, my battery is dead or my starter is dead, and it's actually the battery cables that and not being securely anchored or simply being corroded. Okay, you can extend the life of your battery and starter when you're using a diesel, particularly by using starting age, plug-in block heaters. I love that. I've got that on my diesels. I plug it in, half hour, the engine's warm. If it's 20 degrees out, even if it's getting down to 40 degrees, I plug it in and start that engine. It starts right up. It's easy on the battery. It's easy on the engine because the lubricants are warm. They start right up. Glow plugs in the engine. If any of you have diesel pickups, when you turn the key on, it says wait to start. That's your glow plug cycling. It heats up each cylinder. Some of them actually, it's in the intake manifold. Heats the air coming in so it fires, and avoid using starting fluid if you can, and especially never use it with glow plugs because you'll have an explosion or fire inside of your manifold rather than at the cylinder where it should be. Okay, here's my plug-in block heater. You can see it right up here. It's kind of hard to get out on my Ford, but you just plug it in. It just takes a few minutes. Like I say, half an hour, it's gone. It's warmed up. Here's a glow plug that's in the intake manifold of another tractor. And like I say, be really careful on using starting fluid because you can really do some damage to an engine because this is solvent that washes the oil off the cylinder walls or increases wear, plus it's fires a lot hotter than normal. So just be really careful. What you should add, and I use either a baster or a little filler like this, Arm & Hammer or just any baking soda for that matter with a little tuna cup and a flux brush, mix up a slurry of that, brush it on the terminals, that destroys the corrosion. Then you wipe it off or wash it off. Battery terminal cleaners, brushes or scrapers to clean the terminals. Also, I use a multimeter and tester to check for my charging. Batteries should be about 12 to 12.5 volts. You start the engine, it should go up to about 13.5 to 14 volts. It tells you your charging system's run. Always wear safety glasses when you're working this because the electrolyte inside these batteries is sulfuric acid, and it will destroy your eyeballs and your skin in short order. So just be really careful working around batteries. There's filling the battery, okay? You look down the side, you'll see a little split ring. You fill it up, just comes up over the top of the cells. There's applying a battery terminal cleaner. Just put it on, twist it a couple times, it cleans the terminal up. You can also use these kinds of things. This is a battery cleaner. This particular one I got from the hardware store. Spray it on, and it's just basically a liquid or spray type baking soda. Once it foams up and dissolves, then you can wipe it off or wash it off. And then spray this little battery protector over the top. It's kind of like a spray grease, and it just keeps the air out, which helps slow down oxidation. Okay, checking your tires, keep them properly filled with air. These tires are actually surprising. They don't need as much air as your car does. They actually operate only about 12 to 20 pounds of pressure. You can put extra tires on your equipment. This is a 370 horsepower tractor. It duals all the way around. That's because it takes this much rubber on the ground to get all that power in without spinning. Okay. Plus, it provides a lot of stability and less soil compaction. And this is the farmers are always fighting that because you compact the soil, the air and water and nutrients and roots don't go through it. So extra tires do that. You can add extra weight to the tractor. It gives you more traction and more stability. The more tires, as I showed, goes more better transfer of power and more flotation. We often put liquid ballast in the tires. That's to add extra weight for traction. Traditionally, they used a water calcium chloride solution. It's about 12 pounds per gallon instead of just a little under 8 pounds per gallon. So it increases the weight of your tractor tire by quite a bit. You only fill them to about 75% capacity to leave an air cushion. I'll show you that in the next picture. The one used today in tires is called BioGuard, is a brand name, or we call it beet juice because it is a byproduct of the sugar beet industry. It's more expensive, but it doesn't rust the rims because calcium chloride is a salt, and if you get a leak, it'll rust your rims out in your tractor. And so I go for the little more expense, And in fact, most farmers do today, because it does not rust the rims. You have this added at your tire dealership, like Les Schwab or Cooper Tires or whoever does your, and then you check your tire pressure with a valve stem at the top of the wheel rotation like this, because this is my level of water I've got in Alice. Okay, this is a beet water. So this tire, instead of weighing about 400 pounds, now weighs about 1,000 pounds. So it gives me that much more weight to get better traction. And then you want to check your tire pressure with the valve stem at the top. Otherwise, if I check it down here, I'm just going to get water coming out, water and beet juice into my gauge. So open the valve, pressure gauge. Most of your pressure gauges that are used, sold for cars are usually around 30 to 100 pounds pressure. This one goes from 0 up to about 25. So, and then when I get all done, I rinse that out in water because I might just get a little bit of liquid into it. You can also add other weights to the tractor to get better balance and traction. Cast iron wheel weights can be bolted onto the wheels to give extra weight. Front end weights to add stability to the tractor. Here's where they use those. To help hold this front end down. This particular tractor, we ran it as a Ford 5000, ran it with a 3-bottom rollover plow that weighed about 900 pounds, and we lift that off the ground, the front end would want to come up. We didn't have good steering, so we put 640 pounds of cast iron weights on the front right there called suitcase weights. Here's Oliver, and I've got these weights, are the cast iron weights that bolt inside the rim. Okay, and of course loader tractors, because when you lift a heavy load with the front end, the back end wants to pivot around the axle, come up off, so you don't have traction. So that's a 1,200-pound concrete block on this particular tractor that adds stability to this tractor and traction, so I can actually move once I get a big load of whatever in my bucket. Let me get quickly to these other points here. There's several ways to get power out of your tractor. Of course, the old most standby way was a drawbar. You're dragging things, pulling a trailer or a piece of equipment. They also then developed these 3-point hitch or different hitch systems that would lift the equipment. Power takeoff, which provides rotary power. They have remote hydraulics, which operate remote cylinders or motors and things on equipment, and electrical connections, which do everything from, like this one is just designed to operate lights for traveling on the road, right on up to the ones that now operate all kinds of sensors and cameras and activation devices on some of the fancier equipment. There's a piece of equipment mounted to Oliver, the field cultivator. This lifts it up and lets it down, controls the depth and so on. So that's what a 3-point hitch does. It has 2 lower lift arms. The right one usually is adjustable for leveling, and the top link is also adjustable for leveling fore and aft. And they come in various sizes. The smaller tractors use what we call a category 1, and in 2 and 3 and on up to 4. As horsepower increases, you need a bigger pin to stand the transfer of power between the two. So this is what you're going to be dealing with mostly, category 1, which is 7/8 diameter pin. Here's your top link. It's like a turnbuckle, left-hand threads and right-hand threads in each end. So when you turn this middle part, it goes farther apart or closer together for adjusting your lift. And when you're pulling things with like a trailer or anything with a hitch, always have a safety pin, because those pins can work out going down the road or through the field as bouncing. It's real embarrassing to look back and whatever you pulled behind you when you left the barn is not there any longer. Okay, I'm going to skip through some of this. I want to talk just a bit about PTO because it's something most people are not familiar with, and it can be really, really dangerous. And what it does is transmits engine rotary power to the implements, either carried implements like a rototiller or drawn like a baler, for example, or a brush hog mower. And it can operate when they're moving or standing. The 2 common sizes are 540 RPM. Or 1,000 used on the bigger tractors. And whatever the speed it's going at, those shafts are very, very dangerous. Keep those guards in place and stay away from those moving parts, because getting entangled in a PTO shaft does not end well for anybody. Okay, let me skip through some of this too. Okay, lights. I want to talk about lights because that's part of operating and safety on these things. And having success with a tractor, a lot of it is being able to operate it productively and safely. Okay, so work lights for night field work. They give you good vision all around, front, rear sides. The big tractors we got, they're lit up like a Christmas tree. And then there's also lighting for travel on public highways, because we do a lot of moving on public highways and with our ag equipment. And it's really tough to be out there with a vehicle that's only going 20 or 25 miles an hour and everybody else is doing 50 or 60 or 70. And we're wide, we're 12 feet wide or more in many cases. And the people that are trying to get around us are, of course, in a hurry and aren't maybe familiar with what we're trying to do, which is we're not there for a Sunday drive. We're just trying to get to the next field to produce your dinner, folks. So whether we're out there a day or night, we have our lights on. White lights to the front, red or amber to the rear, often hazardous flashing lights. And we're also required by law to have signage, a slow-moving vehicle on the implement, and on the last visible piece, let me try again, last visible piece of equipment, which means if it's a high trailer or the back of the tractor. Here you can see a beacon on this tractor. Look at the lights on this thing, front, side, rear. Same thing in this guy. Here's your front lights, which should often be on for the travel on the, and here's your, again, flashing ambers off to the side at the outside edge of your load. There's Oliver with his lights on. Both for day work and, of course, when I'm on the road, I turn it on. This is a slow-moving vehicle sign, an SMV. This is what it looks like in the day. That's what it looks like in the dark. And if you're on the road with that thing, people are going to see you. They may not always know what it means, but at least they're going to see you. And if you guys are on the road with your tractor, get one of these on the back of your tractor, because that will give that other person a warning. And I'll tell you, vehicle tractor collision is not ever a good thing for the tractor operator, because you're not usually inside of a cab, you're not fastened in, and it's just not a good place to be. So we want to try to avoid that by lighting and signage when you're on the road. And then, of course, personal protective equipment. I always wear hearing protection. In fact, my hickory shirt that I'm wearing right now, it's right here in my right pocket. It's with me all the time. I wear these earplugs. You can wear these kinds. There actually is a term for audiologists use called farmer's ear. Typically, it's the left ear, because you sit in a tractor implement looking back at your implement. Usually your left ear is closest to the exhaust, and that's the one you go deaf in first. So anytime I'm on my equipment, my chainsaw, my mower, I don't care what it is, I start it up, I get my earplugs out and put them in. Eye protection when I'm working on anything, particularly batteries, if I'm running anything where I might be throwing material. I often wear sunglasses in the summer in the fields to protect my eyes, and particularly from dirt and chaff and things. And then, of course, hand and footwear, the appropriate kind to protect your feet and hands. And so just about done. So I just want to remind you that farming is a really dangerous business and equipment is unforgiving. It's the third or in the top three most dangerous professions in the United States. And I unfortunately have had friends severely injured or even killed by farming accidents, and they typically were all preventable by taking your time, using precautions, personal protective equipment or guards on the equipment. For example, if you take a guard off, put it back on. Usually it's somebody being in a big hurry trying to get the job done. And yeah, and like I said earlier, I said, driving from here to Spokane for 6 hours is tiring, but that for a tractor operator doesn't even get you till noon usually. So if you're tired, take a break. And again, if you don't think you can safely complete a job, don't attempt it. I've a number of cases I know about where people have, and I'll use the term rookies, but I'm not being derogatory in that, but somebody that's just trying to first start that, if you don't know how to do that or afraid of doing it, then probably shouldn't do it. Get someone to help you do it. So keep your equipment in top shape. Maintenance is not a cost. It is really, it's money in your pocket because the equipment doesn't break down. Plan to schedule maintenance by day or hour meter, maybe take a rainy winter day. Keep some record of your maintenance when it's done, mark on your filters, change hours or record it in your owner's manual or a notebook. Keep your equipment clean. That's one thing I demand. I do work for a couple farmers on their equipment, and I demand that it's clean when it comes to me, because it's easier to work on, and it gets them in the habit then too of, if they know Van's going to look at it, it's going to be clean. Otherwise, he's not going to work on it. So and I work on under a lot of dairy farm equipment, and that is probably the worst environment because manure and silage is very corrosive, and getting a buildup on that on the tractor is just asking for premature wear. Okay, and also that accumulated dirt and things. Not only they create maintenance problems, but the things you can't even see under a layer of dirt. So let's keep those things off. Okay, all right. So that's the end of my 6 bits. I know that was fast, but that's a lot of information to cover. So does anybody have any questions or parting shots?
Yeah, we're going to start from the top, Steve. First question that came in, this was earlier when you were talking about batteries, but is it still okay to use Vaseline on battery terminals to prevent corrosion?
Sure, because what Vaseline's a petroleum product. All it's going to do is going to coat that battery terminal. And it's after you clean it, of course, clean the terminal thoroughly, and then put something on. I've often used just grease out of my grease gun. I use that spray-on grease because it's a lot handier and cleaner to use. But Vaseline would work great because it's going to keep that air away from the battery terminal and prevent oxidation. Absolutely. Yep. Whatever you can do is, yeah. Yep. Do it.
Perfect. And then someone said that they love older tractors, 1950s and older. Keep an eye out for one that would be a reliable multi-use small farm yard tractor that could be operated by this individual who's a mom and to teach kids on. So any recommendations in that regard of older tractors?
That's okay. So like I said, Oliver is 1957. His birth date. Same with Alice. Alice, by the way, is going to go in the shop this next year and get a new coat of paint and some upgrades. That's a 1965 tractor. So yeah, I love older tractors. They're easy to work on. Now I also run fairly new tractors in the field. But you can find and these guys, the nice thing about these is they're small, they're easy to work on, easy to maintain, they're tough. And you can find them all over the place. And there's a couple of groups around. Puget Sound Antique Tractor Association up in Linden has a show every year. They haven't been able to have it this year, but it's at Berntheisen Park, usually the first weekend of August. There's also a 2-cylinder club in Skagit County, which is the John Deeres. There's one in Monroe area. Sky Valley Antique Tractor. And if you get a hold of any of those people, you can probably Google that stuff in the clubs. Those guys know where those old tractors are. And there's also some auctions, some marine equipment up in that's where I bought Oliver from. Up in north of Bellingham on the guide. Bob Vanderplug runs that. He has, they'll get older tractors like this in that come from farms that are just basically they're either upgrading or somebody's retiring and they're still in good use. I had to do some work on Oliver, but I could have used him when I brought him home. It's just I wanted it to do other things. The PTO wasn't working right, the brakes weren't working right, and things. So then once I got started, I kind of went right through it. So yeah, you can find that stuff. And the biggest thing you're going to be competing against with those older tractors is collectors, really. But there are a lot of good tractors that have a good life. I expect, in fact, my sons, their kids, my grandkids are already fighting over who's going to get which tractor when I'm gone. I hope it's not tomorrow, but they want those because they know what cool tractors they are, and they're only 10 and 6, so they got a long ways to wait here. But yeah, yeah, absolutely. Those old tractors are just as good today as they were. In fact, here's Oliver. I was rototilling with him with my tractor rototiller, cleaned my garden up this fall. I was yarding my firewood out of the woods this spring with it. This guy is always on the trailer or on my buzz saw or with a rototiller or the postal digger. I mean, these guys are working tractors. They have to work for their gasoline. They don't sit around. There's no snowflakes on my farm. So yeah, go get yourself an older tractor. They're fun to work on, and there's lots of sources of finding parts and advice and things about working on these guys. Yeah, absolutely.
So given that, in that previous question, are there any particular makes that you would recommend? I know it seems like Oliver's your favorite, but I'm not going to speak for you.
Oliver's my favorite because I grew up on that tractor, okay? One similar to that. And Allis Chalmers did the same thing. There was an Allis Chalmers dealership just down the road from our farm in Mount Vernon, which is no longer there. But both Allis Chalmers and Oliver are no longer in production. They both went out in the farm crisis in the 85s. They were bought up by other companies. they're no longer made. And I'm telling you that because I can still get parts for those. And that's one of the nice things about older tractors, rather than older cars, for example, is there are sources out there. I have to go, I talked to a guy back in Michigan to get my Oliver parts, but they're readily available. There are businesses. This particular guy I go to, it's him and his son's farm. They still farm with Olivers and other tractors, but they, on their side, they have a tractor wrecking yard. And they specialize in Oliver. All you got to do is get on that computer and Google in Oliver 55 Super 55 carburetor, and boom, you'll come up with a whole bunch of responses or sources. So yeah, it's really easy to find those. Of course, the only tractor company in existence today that was in existence by name 100 years ago is John Deere. Okay, Ford is now New Holland. Case and International have combined to Case IH. Oliver and Allis Chalmers, well, what's left of Allis Chalmers is under AGCO, but yeah, you can find the stuff. Don't be afraid to go after that stuff. And like I said, there are collectors out there that, and people and they're willing to help other people with that, finding stuff. Yeah.
That's great to hear. I appreciate that.
No, to answer, I guess that rest of that question is no. Yes, I have a favorite. Oliver and Allis are my favorites, but the best tractor I've ever been on is the tractor I'm on at that minute. If it does the job for me, I don't care what a color is. If it does the job, that's what I want. Okay.
I guess on the flip side, are there any makes or specific models of tractors that you just happen to have to fix more often, or is it really case by case?
No, no, not really. And I work mostly, well, I can't even say that, but I've done a lot of work on internationals because the farmer that I work for, that's what he has. That's his brand that he really likes. But it's just like cars. Every car dealership will tell you what great service and parts department they have. There's a reason for that, because they all will break and they all will need parts and service. And the same thing is true with the tractors. They all have good service departments. So no, I can't say, it's more case by case. It's more how you treat that tractor, how it's been treated before you got it, but if you're the second or third owner. Yeah, I can't say that there's anyone I have to repair more than any others. No.
That's fair. We don't have any more questions from folks. There was just a suggestion for a cleaner for exterior of a tractor, which was S100 motorcycle spray / winch cleaner. So thanks for that, Bonnie.
Mhm.
But if anyone has a burning question related to tractor maintenance and preventative maintenance for Steve, please ask now, and just appreciate folks staying with us, going over time a little bit, but Steve's very knowledgeable and is, just great to be answering everyone's questions. And all right, I don't see anything else. So
let me just ask, is there anything that I didn't cover that you thought I should have covered in this brief, knowing we're within the scope of preventive maintenance, not repair and tune up and all that, but is there anything that I didn't cover that you need to know? Okay.
Nothing. Bonnie said wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
Yeah, and then you all can reach Steve through Snohomish Conservation District's website. His email's on the website somewhere in our staff or board of supervisors. And then Steve also works part-time at Arlington Hardware. So if you need to track him down, that's where you go. I'm just kidding.
Mondays only. I'm in the saw shop.
Oh, great. Perfect. Everyone says thank you so much. Really informative, super helpful. You're great.
Okay. Thank you very much, folks.
Thanks, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your classes today. And if you all are joining Michael Hitt for Best Horsekeeping on Sunday, you will see me there too. All right. Thank you so much, Steve.
Yep.
Really helpful.
Bye, folks. See you later.
Bye.